In this riveting narrative, Jessica, a woman who has endured years of abuse at the hands of her husband Nicholas, makes a courageous decision to escape with her son John in pursuit of a safer and happier life. Their journey leads them to an abandoned house nestled in the woods, where they encounter Thomas, a man with his own troubled past. As Jessica and Thomas share their harrowing stories, an unspoken bond forms between them, offering hope and protection. Meanwhile, Nicholas, consumed by rage, embarks on a vengeful quest to track down his fleeing wife. This compelling tale promises to delve into themes of survival, the resilience of the human spirit, and the transformative power of newfound love. To stay updated on this gripping exploration, be sure to subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and leave your comments. And now, we enter the next chapter of Jessica's story. Jessica anxiously waited for Nicholas to drive out of the yard before springing into action. She hurriedly entered her son John's room, urging him to prepare for their imminent departure. Tearfully, John questioned their destination, to which Jessica replied with uncertainty, "I don't know yet, John. Just somewhere far away from here." As mother and son swiftly gathered essentials, a palpable sense of urgency hung in the air. John, looking up at his mother, asked, "Mom, are we going to get away from Daddy, so he won't hurt you anymore?" With determination in her eyes, Jessica reassured him, "Yes, sweetheart. We just have to hurry and get as far away as possible while he's gone." "Mommy, are you sure he won't find us?" "We'll do our best, John. When he does find us, we'll be safe," Jessica whispered as she packed a backpack with only the essentials. Taking out her passport and her son's papers, she intentionally left her cell phone behind, knowing Nicholas could use it to track them. Jessica's financial dependence on Nicholas complicated their escape. He controlled everything, from the money to her ability to work. The once seemingly reliable and good Nicholas had revealed his true colors after John's birth, becoming an abusive force in their lives. As the abuse escalated, Jessica's hope for a better future diminished, and she finally decided it was time to escape. The catalyst for their flight was a brutal incident where Nicholas, in a fit of rage, not only beat Jessica, but also struck John. It was the breaking point for Jessica. Realizing they needed to escape before things worsened, she planned to file for divorce and establish a new life before Nicholas could locate them. As they left the cottage village, Jessica and John walked briskly toward the bus stop. However, at the last moment, Jessica changed her mind, opting to catch the bus elsewhere. As they reached the edge of the forest, memories flooded back of a time they had run through these woods, emerging on the other side of town. An hour later, a significant chapter in their journey awaited them. They boarded the bus, exhausted yet content. Without bothering to check its destination, they traveled a short distance. 4 stops initially, and then a few more. Now, they found themselves at a gazebo-marked stop, surrounded by emptiness. Jessica overheard the bus mentioning that the village wasn't far, a pleasant journey through the woods taking about 15 minutes or a road trip lasting 30 to 40 minutes. Driven by weariness, they moved towards the forest. The need for shelter and rest became apparent. Jessica planned to approach someone for assistance, spend a peaceful night, and then figure out their next steps. However, the forest thickened, growing taller and darker. As dusk approached, Jessica contemplated spending the night in the woods. To her relief, the forest eventually gave way to a clearing, revealing a solitary house. Large, well-built, but seemingly abandoned. Curiosity mixed with caution, Jessica and John approached the house. Despite its exterior appearance, the inside was surprisingly orderly. Jessica decided against disturbing anything, acknowledging the possibility of an owner. They ate the sandwiches from home, and John, exhausted, drifted into a deep sleep. While lying awake, Jessica listened to the unfamiliar night sounds. However, a disturbing dream gripped her, fading as she awoke to an unsettling noise, the refrigerator door opening. Panic set in as she noticed a light emanating from the kitchen, unnoticed before. Jessica, sensing a potential threat, faced the dilemma of negotiating their safety or attempting to leave unnoticed. She stood up slowly, surveying the situation, and then looked at her sleeping son. The kitchen door swung open, revealing a big man with a beard and goggle eyes, about a decade older than her. Realizing her predicament, Jessica pleaded, "Please forgive us. We thought the house was abandoned, and we just got lost. We'll leave as soon as it's light." The man, seemingly amused, closed the door partially, allowing him to observe John. Concerned for her safety, Jessica stepped forward cautiously, admitting they were lost and telling her story. The man, introduced as Thomas, listened attentively, and Jessica, realizing the importance of honesty, shared her narrative without reservation. In that moment, she recognized the necessity of escaping her past much earlier. Thomas, intrigued, prompted her to continue when she finished. He inquired, "I understand correctly, you have nowhere to go." Jessica nodded, "Yes, but don't worry, we'll leave in the morning." He smirked again, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Where to, if it's no secret?" "To some village. We'll ask for a place to stay, and maybe I'll find some work in the village," Jessica replied hesitantly. He chuckled. "What's wrong? If you don't know, there hasn't been a job in the village for 15 years. Well, go to bed. I'll sleep in the room. There's the door. Tomorrow we'll think about it, and tonight we'll rest." He turned around but quickly returned, handing her a blanket. "Here, take a blanket. It'll be chilly by morning, freeze the baby." Jessica accepted the blanket and went to the bed where John was sleeping. Strangely, her soul felt calmed, fear replaced by a newfound sense that they were not alone, that they were protected. In the morning, Jessica woke up with the sun already high. John was not in bed. Panic gripped her momentarily until she saw her son outside with Thomas, cleaning up the rows of cut grass. John was smiling and chatting with Thomas as if they had known each other for ages. Jessica stepped onto the porch. "Good morning." John beamed. "Mommy, you're up." "Mom, you have no idea. Uncle Thomas promised to take me fishing." Jessica anxiously looked at her son. "What fishing trip?" "We have to keep going, Mom. Can't we stay a few days? Uncle Thomas says we can stay." Thomas approached. "You're not in a hurry, are you? Your boy's never been fishing in his life." Jessica wanted to protest, but she held back. Thomas sighed. "John and I have already had breakfast, but we probably won't say no to tea." As Jessica prepared breakfast and lunch, Thomas and John took care of tasks outside. When she stepped out, she was astounded. The once overgrown house and yard were now neat and tidy. Thomas explained, "There's no place for the child to play ball, and there might be a snake lurking in the grass." He took out a beautiful ball from the barn and said, "Let's get you a gate, John. I can't play with you all the time." In the evening, after John fell asleep, Jessica and Thomas sat down in the kitchen to drink tea. Curious, Jessica asked, "Thomas, if you don't want to answer, I understand. But still, what are you doing here? You don't look like a countryman." Thomas smiled. "It didn't work out, did it? Oh, I tried so hard. My story is as banal as yours. My wife cheated on me with my best friend." Jessica gasped. "You killed them, and now you're hiding." Thomas looked at her in surprise, then laughed. "What a fantasy. No, I didn't kill anyone. I was just too hurt by the double betrayal to take a break. So I arrived here. This house used to be my grandfather's. He was a forester here," Thomas said, a touch of sadness in his smile. "It's good to have a place to hide. I don't have a place." "Then stay. There's plenty of room for everyone. It's not far. A 10-minute walk from the village. I'll show you," he'd offered. Jessica didn't say anything. It all sounded promising, but living without money seemed impossible. They would eat Thomas's food, and then what? A week passed quickly, then another. One day, Jessica approached Thomas. "Thomas, how long can we sit on your neck? I have to do something. I have to find a place to go, a place to work, a place to live. You can't babysit us all the time." Meanwhile, John was doing well, putting the ball in the goal, oblivious to their conversation. Thomas replied, "It's not like I'm chasing you, but I totally understand. Why don't we all go back to the city together? I've got a big apartment. You can have your own room while you get settled." Jessica looked at him fearfully, but that's where Nicholas is. Exactly. Are you going to spend the rest of your life hiding from him in the woods? That's not the point. What about John? He's going to school this year. He needs to socialize with his peers. 3 days later, they moved back to the town with Thomas. Jessica wasn't sure if it was the right decision, but Thomas was telling the truth. She couldn't spend her whole life in hiding. When Jessica had initially shared her story with Thomas that first night in the forest home, she hadn't gone into detail about Nicholas's abuse. However, when they lived together, she opened up about the extent of the torment. Thomas clenched his fists, white-knuckled with rage, vowing never to let Nicholas harm Jessica or John again. That night, Jessica cried in Thomas's arms, releasing years of humiliation and fear. She felt lighter and calmer, knowing she now had a guardian angel in Thomas. Over time, John and Thomas grew close. In the city, they spent quality time together, as Thomas promised, taking John fishing and teaching him valuable life skills. They went on camping and fishing trips, forming a strong male friendship. Nicholas eventually found Jessica a few months later, but by then, Jessica had a newfound support system in Thomas. She loved it so much that she filed for divorce as soon as she arrived. Thomas was far from poor. He had his own business, and although it was a big apartment, they didn't see each other much because Thomas was often away at work. Jessica ran to the store and bought some fish. Thomas gave her money for household expenses, which she thought was too much, but he laughed, saying that he spent a lot more on dinners in restaurants because he couldn't cook. She was almost to the driveway when a familiar voice called out to her, "Jessica, wait a minute." She stumbled, terror sweeping over her. She recognized the voice immediately. It belonged to her husband, Nicholas. Jessica slowly turned around. Nicholas stood next to her, his eyes narrowed, indicating an intense level of rage. "Why are you acting so bad, wifey, or have you relaxed? Didn't I bring you up enough?" He clenched his fists, and Jessica squirmed, covering her face with her hands. She heard some kind of slap, then a loud thud, but there was no punch. Cautiously, she opened her eyes. Nicholas was lying on the ground, with Thomas towering over him. "Remember, weakling, if I ever see you near her or Jan again, I will bury you in the asphalt. You got it? Who are you? Who the hell are you?" Thomas pulled out a business card and shoved it into Nicholas's pocket. "I'm the man who will keep them safe forever." He turned around, took the bag from Jessica's hands, and pushed her toward the entryway. Jessica walked and smiled. She had such hope. She was even afraid to admit to herself that she had fallen in love with Thomas. "Like a girl in front of the door," he asked. "When's the divorce?" "In 5 days. We have to get married, you realize?" Thomas spoke in a long and rambling voice. Jessica turned to him and gave him a quick kiss. "I agree." Thomas looked up, frozen, then asked, "And you won't be disgusted to live with me? I'm talking about real life." Jessica laughed. "How could it be disgusting with someone you love, Tom?" Thomas was a little confused, then dropped the package and picked her up in his arms. "Are you serious? I didn't even dare to dream of such a thing." Shortly after, Jessica and Thomas married. They had a daughter named Anna, and John, now a big brother, was very proud. Nicholas didn't cause any more problems. It seemed he had found a new victim and was now preoccupied with her. Jessica continued to work, coming home to her loving husband and 2 children. Thomas tried to spend as much time with his family as possible. When John went to school, he made many friends, and Thomas and Jessica enjoyed watching their son grow up to be a healthy and fun-loving child. A few years later, another son was born to them. Now both the baby and Anna ran after their older brother, and John willingly played with them. Jessica thanked fate for this new life full of love and family warmth. Next to Thomas, she truly blossomed and believed in herself and her strength. After Nicholas ran into Thomas at Jessica's doorstep, he didn't show up for a while. A couple of months later, Jessica happened to see him on the street. Nicholas was walking with his arm around a skinny girl in her 20s. Jessica realized, from her frightened look, that this poor girl had fallen into the clutches of a tyrant and a domestic abuser. Jessica and Thomas had seen Nicholas several times with different women. Apparently, he would find a victim, marry her, and then, when she ran away, look for the next unfortunate one. When John grew up, Jessica once talked to him about his former father. It turned out he tried to get in touch with his son a couple of times, but John stayed away from the guy. He loved his real dad, Thomas. The last time they heard from Nicholas was about 5 years ago. They say he married some rich widow. I guess he got lucky, and now he may not be looking for another victim, but just enjoying life at her expense. After Nicholas married the rich widow, he was happy at first. Finally, life was getting better, no money problems, no need to work, just enjoying himself. However, over time, it turned out that his new spouse was an overbearing, dominant woman who constantly humiliated and insulted Nicholas, forcing him to fulfill humiliating whims. He tolerated all her antics because she made a will in his favor. Therefore, Nicholas hoped to endure and, after her death, get a rich inheritance. For the sake of this, he was ready to bear any humiliation from his own wife. However, in the end, such a life broke Nicholas. He drank himself to sleep, almost lost his mind from constant abuse, and then the widow changed her mind, amending the will and depriving her husband of the right of inheritance. In the end, Nicholas was left with nothing. The cruel, dominant spouse threw him out on the street, taking all his money and property. The boomerang of his misdeeds came back and ruined Nicholas's own life. As John grew older, it was hard for him to realize and believe what his own father, Nicholas, had once done. He heard stories from his mom about the beatings and humiliations she suffered from this cruel and heartless man. John couldn't understand how it was possible to beat and torture his own wife, the mother of his child. When John was about 12 years old, Jessica carefully told him about the incident when Nicholas had hit him, a little boy, and how he had thrown him to the corner of the room when John had stood up for his mom. Goosebumps ran down John's spine at the realization of that horror and pain. He couldn't believe for a long time that it was his own father doing that. A man who was supposed to love, protect, and defend his family, but instead caused them unbearable suffering. John was truly grateful to fate that he had another man by his side now. His dad, Thomas, sensitive, responsive, and so dear. It was him that John considered a real father and role model. When they were already a happy and friendly family, Jessica suggested that they go together to that abandoned cabin in the woods where they had once found shelter. The whole family happily agreed. They arrived in the woods, found a clearing with a house that looked abandoned as well. Stepping inside, Jessica and Thomas felt nostalgic, remembering their first meeting. For the boys, it was an exciting adventure to spend the night as a family in an old house in the middle of the woods. They listened with delight to their parents' stories about those events, how Mom and Dad met and fell in love. In those days, there was an atmosphere of unity, warmth, and love in the forest. In the evenings, everyone sat around the fire, baked sausages, told stories, and played games. One day, a thunderstorm suddenly began. Heavy clouds covered the sky, a strong wind blew, and then there was a real hurricane. It seemed that the old house was about to collapse from the gusts of wind. Thunder rumbled, lightning flashed. The children huddled fearfully around their parents, but Thomas was not confused. He calmed everyone down and took them to the safest room in the house. Then he boarded up the windows and doors to keep the drafts out. When the storm subsided a little, Thomas lit the fireplace, and the house became cozy. Thomas got chocolate, marshmallows, and flashlights out of his backpack. They had an impromptu picnic right on the living room floor. The kids were so grateful to Thomas. Thanks to his resourcefulness and courage, everyone stayed safe and sound. Now the story of how the head of the family saved everyone has become a family legend. The story of the hurricane. Once again, it clearly demonstrated to Jessica the fundamental difference between Thomas and her ex-husband Nicholas. In a critical situation, Nicholas only swore and blamed everyone around him. He never sacrificed his comfort for the well-being of his family. Thomas, on the other hand, did not hesitate to risk himself to shelter and save his loved ones. He acted decisively and rationally. His coolness and resourcefulness were admirable. After everything that had happened, Jessica was firmly convinced that with Thomas, she and the children would be safe. With him, they could survive any hardships and storms because he is a real man, a pillar of safety and security for the family. When compared to spineless Nicholas, it's just night and day. With Thomas, Jessica found real peace of mind, love, and care. She thanked fate for this meeting every day. This trip brought the whole family together even more. When they returned home, rested and happy, they remembered this unforgettable adventure for a long time and thanked the abandoned house that had once been the beginning of their new family.